Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the surprisingly peaceful life of a Viking tax collector. Yes, such a person actually existed. You trudge through frost-covered fields in your thick wool cloak, boots crunching over icy patches, a leather satchel slung across your shoulder filled with parchment scrolls instead of plunder. The wind bites at your cheeks as you approach a small wooden longhouse nestled between towering pines, smoke curling lazily from its roof. Inside, someone waits to pay their dues, not in gold or silver alone, but sometimes in goats, dried fish, or even handmade tools. You're not here to pillage or raid. You're here to collect what's owed, and believe it or not, this job is just as dangerous as storming a foreign shore. After all, you probably won't survive this if you mess up a single payment schedule. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time so we can all imagine each other huddled under our blankets, drifting off together into history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You were born into a world where strength meant survival, but you never had the stomach for bloodshed. While your cousins trained with axes and learned the art of boarding enemy ships, you studied runes, trade routes, and the fine print of Norse law carved into wood tablets. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. The Jarl needed coin, or rather, goods, to fund his expeditions, maintain alliances, and keep the peace among rival clans. That responsibility fell to people like you, the quiet enforcers of order in a land built on chaos. Your work begins at dawn. With a warm bowl of skyr porridge in one hand and a wax-sealed scroll in the other, you step outside into the crisp morning air. Smoke rises from chimneys, dogs bark in the distance, and somewhere nearby, a blacksmith pounds out another sword someone will use to either defend or attack. Your route takes you from village to village, sometimes deep into the fjords, sometimes across frozen lakes where the ice groans beneath your feet. Every settlement has its own rhythm, its own disputes, and its own way of keeping track of debts. Some pay willingly, eager to avoid the wrath of the Jarl. Others need reminding, gentle persuasion wrapped in a threat sharpened by tradition. You carry no sword, but you wield words like weapons. A misplaced phrase could spark a feud lasting generations. A missed payment might mean exile or worse, an axe buried in your back. Still, there's something oddly satisfying about seeing a ledger filled correctly, about knowing that the Jarl's hall remains stocked with mead because you ensured every farm paid its share. And besides, who else gets to ride through the countryside, greeted with wary nods and occasional hospitality, collecting more than just tribute? You're not just a tax collector. You're a keeper of balance in a world teetering on the edge of violence. Historians still argue whether Viking Age taxation was a formalized system or simply enforced tribute collected at blade point. Some say it was both, a mix of structured obligation and barely veiled intimidation. Either way, you know your role well. You are the polite face of authority, the man who arrives with a smile and a ledger, ready to accept payment or listen to excuses. Most villagers understand the rules, but some test your patience. One old farmer swore he'd already sent his portion to the Jarl's hall last spring, only to realize, after much arguing, that he'd given it to a passing merchant who looked suspiciously like your cousin. Oops. There's also the matter of currency. Coins exist, yes, but they're rare. More often than not, you receive payment in kind: grain, livestock, furs, even salted fish. Once, a particularly stubborn woman tried to pay her debt in chicken feathers, claiming they were as valuable as silver. You accepted them, not because you believed her, but because you knew exactly how many pillows they could stuff for the Jarl's winter bedchambers. Flexibility is key. Adaptability is survival. As the sun climbs higher, you mount your horse and set off toward the next village, your satchel slightly heavier with the weight of today's collections. The road ahead winds through dense forests, past runed stones marking ancient battles and forgotten oaths. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls, reminding you that not everything in this world bows to taxes and ledgers. But for now, you have work to do and a reputation to uphold. The Longship rocks gently beneath your feet as you step aboard, the scent of salt and tar mixing with the crisp morning air. This isn't a vessel built for war. No carved dragon heads adorn its prow. No row of shields line its sides. Instead, it's a merchant ship repurposed for bureaucracy, its cargo hold filled not with plunder but with scrolls, wax seals, and wooden tally sticks. The crew nods to you as they prepare to push off from the dock, their faces weathered by sun and sea. You're not here to fight. You're here to count. As the oars dip into the water and the sails catch the wind, you settle onto a bench near the center of the ship, pulling out your satchel and flipping open one of the heavier ledgers. The parchment is rough between your fingers, stained in places where ink has bled through after being left too close to a damp hearth. Each entry represents months of negotiation, disputes settled over cups of mead or fists clenched around ale horns. Some names are neatly written, others scratched hastily during rushed visits to remote farms. A few are circled in red, a sign that payment is overdue and action may be necessary. You glance up as the coastline slides past, jagged cliffs giving way to rolling green hills dotted with small settlements. Each village has its own customs, its own debts, and its own stubbornness. Some owe grain, others livestock, and a few, like that farmer who tried to pay in chicken feathers, are more trouble than they're worth. Still, it's your job to ensure the Jarl gets what he's owed, whether it comes in silver, dried cod, or a freshly tanned hide. Historians still argue whether Viking-era taxation was purely economic or if it served as a means of political control. Some say it was both, an early form of governance wrapped in tradition and enforced by men like you, who traveled from farm to farm collecting what was due. There's even speculation that certain payments were tied to religious offerings, blending economics with spirituality in ways that made refusal almost sacrilegious. A gust of wind catches the sail, snapping you from your thoughts as the ship tilts slightly to one side. One of the crew shouts an order, and the rowers adjust their pace. You tuck the ledger away and stand, bracing yourself against the swaying deck. In the distance, you spot the next settlement nestled along the shore, smoke rising lazily from its rooftops. Your arrival won't be unexpected. You've sent word ahead, after all. But that doesn't mean everyone will be happy to see you. As the ship pulls into the shallows, the crew jumps into the knee-deep water, hauling ropes over wooden posts driven into the sand. You hop down last, boots sinking slightly into the wet earth before you straighten and adjust your cloak. A small group waits at the edge of the dock. Elders, traders, and a handful of farmers, all watching you with varying degrees of curiosity and dread. Some know you well, having dealt with you for years. Others are new faces, uncertain of what to expect from the man who arrives not with a sword, but with a scroll. One of them steps forward, an older woman with braided hair and sharp eyes. She greets you with a nod, then gestures toward the village. "You'll want to speak to Halvar first," she says. "He's been forgetful." You smile politely, though you already know what that means. Halvar is one of those farmers who always has an excuse. His cows died, his roof leaked, his nephew borrowed half his harvest and never returned it. He's not poor, just creative with his misfortunes. You've learned to take notes when he speaks because inevitably something he says contradicts another story he told last year. As you walk through the village, the familiar rhythm of daily life unfolds around you. Children chase each other between houses, chickens peck at scraps, and somewhere nearby, a blacksmith hammers out a plow blade. It's peaceful, almost idyllic, if you ignore the occasional wary glances thrown your way. You pass a woman hanging laundry on a line, her hands raw from scrubbing wool. She gives you a tight smile before turning back to her work, clearly hoping you aren't here for her. Halvar's house sits near the edge of the village, its walls patched with fresh timber. Smoke curls from the chimney, carrying the scent of roasted meat. As you knock on the door, you hear movement inside, hurried footsteps, the clatter of dishes, and then silence. Finally, the door creaks open, revealing a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and a look of mild panic. "Oh," he says, blinking, "it's you." You nod, offering him your most pleasant expression. "Good morning, Halvar. I trust you've been well." He hesitates, then forces a chuckle. "Well enough. Busy season, you know how it is. Crops, animals, all that." You glance at the fields beyond his house. They look fine, better than fine, actually. Lush and green, promising a good harvest. "Indeed," you say, keeping your voice light. "And I assume your tribute is ready?" His smile falters slightly. "Ah, right. Tribute." He scratches the back of his neck. I was meaning to bring it to the hall soon. Just waiting for my cousin to return with some extra grain." You raise an eyebrow. "Your cousin?" "Yes. Big shipment coming in any day now. Should cover everything." You've heard this before. Last year it was a lost cow. The year before, a storm ruined his storehouse. This time it's a conveniently absent cousin. You pull a small tablet from your belt and make a note. "Well," you say, still smiling, "I'll be staying in the village for the next few days. If your cousin arrives before then, I'd be happy to receive your payment in person." Halvar stiffens slightly. "Right, of course. I'll make sure it's taken care of." You nod, stepping back. "Excellent. I'll see you again soon." As you turn to leave, you hear the door shut behind you with a little more force than necessary. You allow yourself a small chuckle. It's not personal, it's business. And business, as always, must be done. By midday, you've already visited 3 more households, each one offering a different form of payment. Some expected, others less so. A fisherman hands you 2 large cod, still fresh from the morning's catch. A weaver gives you a bundle of dyed wool, its deep red hue rich with the scent of crushed madder roots. Then there's old Sigvard, who insists he doesn't have grain or livestock to offer but presents you with a jar of fermented shark meat instead. You take it without flinching, though your stomach protests at the pungent aroma. It won't be going into your dinner pot anytime soon, but the Jarl's cooks might appreciate the addition to their stores. Barter is the backbone of Viking-era commerce, and as a tax collector, you've learned to accept whatever people can spare. Coins do exist. Silver dirhams from the east are particularly common, but they're not always easy to come by. Most transactions happen through goods rather than currency, making your job both an art and a science. You need to know the approximate value of everything from dried herring to hand-forged iron nails, and you must keep track of what's been collected and what's still owed. One of the trickier aspects of your work is determining fair trade values across regions. What's worth a silver coin in one village might only fetch half that in another, depending on local supply and demand. Some settlements rely heavily on fishing, while others focus on farming or animal husbandry. The further inland you travel, the more likely you are to encounter communities that operate almost entirely on barter, where even a single coin is treated like treasure. Historians still argue whether Viking Age economies were truly decentralized or if certain powerful leaders maintained strict control over trade and taxation. Some suggest that regional chieftains wielded significant influence over economic practices, using tribute collection as a way to consolidate power. Others believe that trade networks operated semi-independently, with local farmers and merchants negotiating their own terms while still paying homage to higher authorities. Either way, you know that every transaction matters. It keeps the Jarl's Hall stocked, funds Longships for future expeditions, and ensures that peace remains intact, however fragile it may be. As you walk back toward the village center, a boy no older than 10 runs up to you, breathless. "You're the tax man," he exclaims, eyes wide with something between awe and fear. You crouch down to his level and smile. "That's right. And what's your name?" "Eric." He hesitates, then adds, "My father says you take everything." You chuckle softly. "Only what's owed." You correct him. "And sometimes I leave things too." You reach into your satchel and pull out a small wooden token carved with runes, a tally stick used to mark payments received. "See this? If your father pays what he owes, he gets one of these. That way, everyone knows he's done his part." Eric examines the stick with fascination before handing it back to you. "Can I have one?" You pretend to consider it. "Only if you promise to pay your taxes when you grow up." He nods solemnly, then darts off toward a group of playing children. You watch him go, shaking your head with amusement. Kids always see things in black and white. Either you're taking from them or giving to them. In reality, it's rarely that simple. Your next stop is the home of Leif the Brewer, a stout man known for producing some of the strongest mead in the region. As you approach his house, the sweet, yeasty scent of fermentation fills the air. He greets you with a grin and a tankard already in hand. "You look like a man who could use a drink," he says, holding it out to you. You accept it cautiously. "I also look like a man who needs to stay sharp." Leif laughs, clapping you on the back. "Come on, just a sip. It'll help settle your stomach after that shark meat business." You take a small drink, appreciating the honeyed warmth as it slides down your throat. "Fair point," you admit. "Now, about your tribute." His expression shifts slightly, though he maintains his jovial demeanor. "Ah, yes. Well, business has been good this season. Strong sales, plenty of customers." You raise an eyebrow. "Then I assume you've set aside what's due?" He gestures toward a row of wooden barrels stacked near his workshop. I was thinking of offering payment in kind. Mead's valuable, isn't it? It is, but you also know how quickly men like Leaf try to offload excess stock under the guise of tribute. Still, it's not a bad idea. Mead will certainly be welcome at the Jarl's Hall, especially during the upcoming feasts. I'll take 2 barrels, you say, but don't think I won't check the quality. Leaf beams. Of course, best stuff you'll ever taste. You make a note in your ledger before turning to leave. As you step back into the sunlight, the weight of your satchel grows heavier, not just from parchment and tokens, but from the tangible sense of duty pressing against your shoulders. Every exchange, every negotiation, every reluctant payment brings you one step closer to fulfilling your obligations. Tomorrow, you'll move on to the next village. Tonight, you'll dine with the elders, share stories around the fire, and listen to the distant hum of wind through the trees. And somewhere in the quiet moments between laughter and song, you'll remember why you chose this path. Not for riches or glory, but because someone had to keep the system running, even in a world built on axes and ambition. You've learned that being a tax collector in the Viking world requires more than just a sharp eye for numbers and a steady hand with a quill. It demands diplomacy, patience, and an uncanny ability to read people, because when you're asking for what's owed, some folks take it personally. You can't afford to be too soft or too harsh. One wrong word could turn a simple transaction into a blood feud stretching generations. So instead, you perfect the art of the gentle threat, the delicate balance between politeness and implied consequence. It starts with your tone. A smile helps, but not too wide. You want to appear approachable, but never weak. Your voice carries warmth, yet there's always an undercurrent of authority. Of course, you say to a particularly reluctant farmer, watching his knuckles whiten around the handle of his axe, I understand how difficult this season has been. A pause, a nod, then almost as an afterthought. But I'm sure you also understand that the Jarl expects every man to do his part. The farmer shifts uncomfortably. He knows what happens to those who fall behind on their dues. Exile? Maybe. A visit from someone less diplomatic than you? Definitely. So he grumbles, mutters something about bad harvests and stubborn cows, then stomps off to fetch the payment he's been avoiding for months. You wait patiently, hands folded behind your back, pretending not to notice the way his wife watches you from the doorway. Arms crossed, lips tight. She probably wishes you'd stay gone longer next time. Historians still argue whether Viking-era taxation was enforced through sheer intimidation or if it relied more on communal obligation. Some believe that most farmers paid willingly, bound by tradition and fear of divine retribution. Others suggest that collectors like you had to be creative with persuasion techniques, using everything from legal loopholes to well-placed rumors about rival clans seizing land from defaulters. Either way, you know that sometimes all it takes is the right look, the right phrase, and the right reminder that the Jarl's men aren't far behind you. One of your favorite tools in these negotiations is the old, remind them of favors owed trick. If a man once borrowed grain during a lean winter, you bring it up, not as an accusation, but as a fond memory. Ah, yes, you say with a nostalgic sigh, the year of the great snowfall. Remember how we all pulled together. His expression darkens slightly because he knows exactly where you're going with this. Well, you continue, since you were so fortunate to receive aid back then, I'm sure you'll be generous in returning the favor now. Sometimes, though, no amount of finesse works. Some people simply refuse to pay unless they see real consequences. That's when you call in backup, a couple of hired guards, usually former warriors looking for steady work. They don't speak much. They don't have to. Their presence alone does half your job for you. When a stubborn debtor sees two large men standing behind you, arms crossed and expressions unreadable, suddenly his resistance seems less appealing. Still, brute force is a last resort. You prefer subtlety, especially when dealing with influential figures, chieftains, merchants, even priests. These men hold power in different ways, and offending any of them could lead to complications beyond unpaid taxes. With them, you offer incentives, a promise of favorable trade routes, a mention of potential alliances, or, when necessary, a quiet warning that certain debts have a habit of accumulating interest in unexpected ways. A quirky historical tidbit you often reference comes from a saga detailing a dispute over unpaid tribute. According to the tale, a particularly obstinate nobleman refused to contribute to the Jarl's coffers until a collector arrived bearing a gift, an ornate drinking horn filled with mead brewed from honey harvested in the nobleman's own fields. The message was clear. The Jarl knew precisely what resources belonged to whom, and nothing went unnoticed. The nobleman paid immediately, realizing that resisting would only make him look foolish. You keep that story in mind whenever you encounter resistance. Sometimes the best way to collect what's owed isn't through threats at all. It's through reminding people that you already know more than they think. Let them wonder how you found out about that hidden stash of silver coins or that extra barrel of salted herring stored in the cellar. Let them worry that their neighbor might have mentioned something suspicious in passing. Most importantly, let them believe that refusing payment will only make things worse. By midday, you've secured another handful of payments, some given willingly, others coaxed along with a few carefully chosen words. As you step away from yet another reluctant taxpayer, you glance toward the horizon. The sun is high, casting long shadows across the village. Soon, you'll move on to the next settlement, carrying with you the same mix of charm, pressure, and unspoken warnings that have kept you alive this long. And somewhere, deep in the recesses of your mind, you remember why you chose this path, not for violence, not for conquest, but for the quiet power that comes from knowing exactly how much leverage you hold. The village of Skalholm is smaller than most, nestled in a valley where the wind howls through the trees like restless spirits. Smoke curls lazily from rooftops, mixing with the scent of damp earth and burning peat. You've been here before. Twice last year, once the year before, and each time, the same disputes resurface like stubborn weeds. Land boundaries shift mysteriously overnight. Livestock disappear only to reappear on a neighbor's pasture. And then there's the laundry, somehow always tangled in someone else's line, sparking arguments that spiral into feuds over past grievances no one even remembers clearly. As you step onto the well-worn path leading toward the village center, a few faces turn your way. Some nod in recognition, others avoid eye contact entirely. A woman sweeping her doorstep mutters something under her breath as you pass, though whether it's a curse or just idle grumbling, you can't be sure. You keep your pace steady, your expression neutral. No need to provoke anyone, not yet anyway. Your first stop is Joran's house, a modest longhouse built from rough-hewn timber and stone. She's one of the more cooperative taxpayers, always paying on time and rarely giving you trouble. As you knock on the door, it creaks open just enough for her to peer out, eyes scanning the street behind you before she steps aside to let you in. "You're early," she says, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "I haven't finished drying the wool yet." You shake your head. "Not here for payment today," you say, stepping inside. The warmth of the hearth welcomes you, along with the scent of fresh bread and stew simmering in a pot. "I heard there was some trouble last week. Thought I'd check in." Joran sighs, closing the door behind you. "Of course you did. Word travels fast." She gestures toward a wooden bench near the fire, and you take a seat while she ladles a bowl of stew for you. "It started with a goat," she begins, stirring the pot absent-mindedly. "Hilda's black Billy wandered into my garden and trampled half my cabbage patch. I told her to keep it fenced in, but she claims it wasn't hers." You raise an eyebrow. "Wasn't it?" She scoffs. "Of course it was. Everyone knows Hilda's goats have a habit of wandering off. But now she's accusing me of stealing her best hen, which I didn't do." You lean back, considering this. It's not the first time livestock have sparked disputes in Skalholm. Last winter, 2 families nearly came to blows over a missing cow. One claimed it had strayed into the forest. The other insisted it had been stolen in the night. In the end, the matter was settled when a third farmer found the cow frozen by a stream, its hooves trapped in ice. Still, tensions run high in small villages where everyone knows everyone else's business. Disputes often escalate quickly, especially when pride is involved. That's where you come in, not just as a tax collector, but as an unofficial mediator. Whether you like it or not, people expect you to settle their quarrels, if only because they know you'll hold grudges against those who make things difficult for you. "Did you see any sign of the hen?" you ask. Joran shakes her head. "No, but Hilda swears she saw it in my coop yesterday morning." You glance around the room, noting the neatly stacked baskets of dried herbs, the woven tapestries hanging on the walls, the sturdy shelves filled with jars of pickled vegetables. There's no evidence of a missing hen anywhere. Still, accusations are tricky things. They don't need proof to cause damage. "I'll talk to Hilda," you say, taking a spoonful of stew. "See what she has to say." Joran nods gratefully. "Thank you. I know it's not your job to settle every little squabble, but..." She trails off, then adds with a tired smile, "Well, you know how it goes." You do, more than she realizes. After finishing your meal, you set the bowl aside and step back into the cold afternoon air. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting long shadows across the village square. A few children chase each other between houses, their laughter ringing through the crisp air. Nearby, a group of men huddle near a bonfire, their voices low and tense. One of them glances your way, then nudges his companion with a knowing look. You ignore them, let them whisper. Hilda's house is just down the road, its roof patched with fresh straw and its windows shuttered tight. As you approach, a dog tied to a post barks furiously, its chain rattling against the wooden stake. Before you can knock, the door swings open, revealing a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. "You," she says, crossing her arms, "come to tell me I'm wrong about the hen?" You offer a calm smile. "Just here to hear your side of the story." She huffs but steps aside, allowing you in. The interior smells of smoked fish and old wool, the hearth crackling with embers. A cat lounges on a shelf above the fire, watching you with lazy curiosity. Hilda wastes no time launching into her tale. That woman stole my hen plain and simple. Saw it with my own eyes, brown feathers, white markings on the wings.
Definitela in mine.
You listen patiently, letting her vent. When she finishes, you ask, "Did you go to her house to confront her?" She hesitates. "Not exactly, but I saw it from my window." You tilt your head slightly. "From your window?" She narrows her eyes. "Yes, this morning right before dawn. I woke up early, looked outside, and there it was, right in her coop." You nod slowly. "And you didn't mention it until later?" She shrugs. "Didn't want to make a scene, right?" You consider your next words carefully. "Hilda, I believe you think you saw something, but sometimes the mind plays tricks, especially in the early hours." Her lips press into a thin line. "Are you saying I imagined it?" "No," you say evenly. "I'm saying mistakes happen. Maybe the hen wandered off on its own. Maybe another neighbor's bird got loose. Either way, accusing someone without proof won't help anyone." She folds her arms tighter. "So what am I supposed to do? Just let her keep it?" You lean forward slightly. "Tell me, have you checked your own coop lately? Any signs of forced entry? Missing eggs?" She hesitates again. "No, but that doesn't mean. It means we don't have enough information to accuse anyone." You interrupt gently. "If the hen shows up again, bring it to me. If you find proof, bring it to me. Until then, maybe focus on keeping your animals secure instead of pointing fingers." For a moment, she looks ready to argue further. Then, with a reluctant grunt, she turns away. "Fine. But if I find out she did take it, you'll let me handle it?" You finish for her. She doesn't respond, but she doesn't argue either. That's good enough for now. As you leave her house, the sun dips lower, casting the village in golden light. Another dispute settled, at least temporarily. You know these fights will never truly end. There is much a part of life here as the changing seasons. But as long as you keep the peace, as long as you remind people that justice doesn't always require swords and bloodshed, you'll do your part. Tomorrow there will be new problems to solve, new debts to collect, new stories to hear. For now, you'll return to the hall, warm yourself by the fire, and let the quiet hum of the evening lull you into sleep. Winter comes swiftly in the north, like a blade drawn from its sheath, sudden, sharp, and unforgiving. The first frost arrives without warning, turning the fields into brittle sheets of ice that crack beneath your boots. By the time you reach the village of Vargstad, snow already clings to the rooftops, curling in delicate drifts along the eaves. Smoke rises sluggishly from chimneys, barely visible against the pale gray sky. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders as you step onto the frozen path, feeling the chill seep through your woolen gloves. Traveling this time of year is never easy, but it's necessary. Debts don't disappear just because the rivers freeze over and the wind howls like restless spirits through the trees. If anything, winter makes people more desperate and more evasive. A boy runs past you, his breath puffing in white clouds, cheeks flushed from the cold. He doesn't glance your way twice. No need to, he already knows who you are. Everyone does. You're the man who arrives when the days grow short, bringing with you the weight of unpaid tributes and the quiet promise that the Jarl will not be ignored. The village looks different under snow. Where once there was movement, farmers tending to their fields, children chasing each other between houses, now there is stillness. Doors remain shut for longer hours, and even the dogs seem reluctant to bark. A few villagers peer out from behind shuttered windows, watching your approach with wary eyes. Some nod in recognition. Others turn away quickly, hoping you'll pass them by. Your first stop is at the home of Thormund the Tanner, a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and a perpetually sour expression. He greets you at the door with a grunt, stepping aside just enough to let you in. "You're early," he mutters, rubbing his hands together. "Figured we'd have another moon or two before you showed up." You shake the snow from your cloak before stepping inside. The warmth of the hearth welcomes you, though the air smells faintly of damp leather and smoke. "Winter comes fast this year," you say, brushing ice from your boots. "Didn't want to risk getting stuck in the fjords." Thormund nods, then gestures toward a wooden bench near the fire. "Sit, I'll fetch something warm." He disappears into the back room while you settle onto the bench, stretching your fingers toward the flames. It's good to be indoors again, if only for a little while. The cold has been relentless on the road. Your nose runs constantly. Your fingers stiffen despite the thick gloves, and your horse's hooves slip dangerously on icy trails. But worse than the physical discomfort is the effect the season has on negotiations. Historians still argue whether Viking-era taxation continued uninterrupted during the harshest months or if certain debts were forgiven due to seasonal hardship. Some believe that collectors adjusted their schedules accordingly, giving farmers and traders more leniency until spring thawed both the land and the economy. Others suggest that tribute was expected regardless of weather, with severe consequences for those who failed to pay. Either way, you know that winter brings its own challenges. People are less willing to part with food stores, tempers run shorter, and disputes tend to escalate faster in the cramped quarters of frostbitten homes. Thormund returns with 2 cups of steaming broth, handing one to you before settling onto the opposite bench. "So," he says, blowing on his cup before taking a sip, "how much do I owe?" You pull your ledger from your satchel, flipping through the pages until you find his name. "Last season, you paid in hides and salted fish," you say, scanning the entries. "This time, I assume you've got more of the same?" He sighs, running a hand through his beard. "Most of my stock went to Uppsala last month. Got a decent price for it too. But what's left isn't much." You raise an eyebrow. "Not much or none?" He hesitates, then shrugs. "Let's say, enough to cover half." That's a familiar tune. You've heard it from fishermen who claim their nets came up empty, from farmers whose crops rotted in storage, from merchants who swear they lost everything to bandits on the road. Sometimes it's true. More often, it's an excuse. You lean forward slightly. "I could take payment in kind," you offer. "Tools, maybe? Or some of that dried meat hanging in your rafters?" Thormund frowns. "That's for winter rations." You nod slowly. "Then perhaps you should consider making arrangements with the Jarl's steward. Postpone part of the payment until next season." His eyes narrow slightly. "And how would that look?" You smile thinly, like a man who plans ahead. Silence stretches between you as the fire crackles softly. Outside, the wind howls, rattling the shutters. Finally, Thormund exhales sharply and sets his cup down. "Fine," he mutters. "I'll give you what I can now, and I'll send word to the hall about delaying the rest." You make a note in your ledger, closing it with a satisfied nod. "Good choice." As you stand to leave, Thormund watches you carefully. "You always make it sound so simple," he says after a moment. You pause at the door, glancing back. "It usually is," you reply. "People just forget that sometimes." He snorts, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, remind them gently, will you? We've had enough trouble this season without stirring things up." You offer him a small smile. "Always." Stepping back into the cold, you adjust your cloak and pull your hood lower. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting long shadows across the snowy village. Another debt settled, at least partially. Tomorrow, there will be more negotiations, more excuses, more reluctant taxpayers waiting to test your patience. But for now, you walk toward the next house. The soft crunch of snow beneath your boots, the warmth of the fire lingering in your bones. Winter may bring its share of hardships, but it also brings something else. Opportunities for deals made over warm drinks, for favors exchanged in private corners of smoky halls, for peace brokered between rivals who suddenly find themselves sharing the same hearth. Yes, winter has its difficulties, but it also has its advantages, and you intend to use every one of them. The dispute over the missing sheep begins, as many do, with a loud argument in the village square. You arrive just in time to see two men, Bjorn and Leif, standing nose to nose, their breaths visible in the cold air as they shout over each other. A small crowd has gathered, watching with the kind of morbid curiosity that only comes from knowing this won't end quietly. You sigh inwardly. Sheep disputes are never simple. In a place where livestock is wealth, the loss of even one animal can spark a feud that lasts years. And when folklore gets involved, well, that's when things really spiral out of control. Pushing through the onlookers, you step between the two men before fists start flying. "All right," you say, keeping your voice calm but firm. "What seems to be the problem?" Bjorn, a broad-shouldered farmer with a thick red beard, gestures wildly toward Leif. "He stole my best ewe," he declares. "Saw it in his pasture yesterday morning, plain as day." Leif scoffs. "That's not yours. That's my own ewe, always has been. If anything, you took one of mine last season." Ah, classic. The accusation circles back like a well-worn trail. You glance at the gathered villagers, noting the way some exchange knowing glances while others mutter under their breath. This isn't just about a missing sheep. It's about pride, history, and possibly a few old grudges resurfacing under new circumstances. You hold up a hand for silence. "Let's take this one step at a time," you say. "First, Bjorn, describe the ewe you're missing." He narrows his eyes. Brown coat, white markings on her left flank. Young, healthy, due to lamb soon. Leif immediately shakes his head. "Nope, mine's black with a streak of gray across her nose. Totally different." You nod slowly. "So you're saying it wasn't your ewe that Bjorn saw?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." A murmur runs through the crowd. Some seem satisfied, others less so. Bjorn folds his arms, clearly unconvinced. Then how do you explain it being in your field? Leaf shrugs. Maybe it wandered off from somewhere else. Or maybe someone pipes up from the edge of the crowd. The Huldra came for it. Silence falls. Even Bjorn hesitates, his glare faltering slightly. Ah, there it is, the folklore angle. For those unfamiliar, the Huldra is a forest spirit from Norse mythology, often depicted as a beautiful woman with a hidden tail, a sign of her supernatural nature. According to legend, she sometimes takes animals, or even people, into the woods, luring them away with enchantments or mischief. Some believe she helps farmers by secretly tending their fields. Others claim she steals livestock as punishment for past sins. You glance at the villagers, noting the wary expressions. Superstition runs deep in places like this. Accusing someone of theft is one thing. Accusing them of consorting with spirits is another matter entirely. You clear your throat, right? Well, before we start blaming forest spirits, let's make sure there's no simpler explanation. Bjorn crosses his arms. Like what? Like a simple case of mistaken identity, you suggest. Sheep look alike more than you'd think, especially in low light. Or maybe another farmer lost an animal recently. Leaf scoffs. I checked my flock myself. No missing sheep. Did you check the borders of your land? You ask. Sometimes animals wander beyond fences, especially if something spooks them. Bjorn looks doubtful, but Leaf frowns thoughtfully. There was a fox near the pasture last week, he admits. Could have startled them. You nod. Exactly. So here's what we'll do. We'll search the area together, follow any tracks in the snow, and see if we can find signs of where the ewe might have gone. Bjorn hesitates, then nods reluctantly. Fine. But if I don't get my sheep back, I'll know who to blame. Leaf mutters something under his breath, but doesn't argue further. With that settled, for now, you lead the group toward the pasture, the snow crunching beneath your boots. As expected, the ground bears fresh tracks, some leading into the woods, others circling the fence. It doesn't take long to spot signs of struggle. Broken branches, disturbed snow, and a faint trail of wool caught on a wooden post. A quick scan confirms what you suspected. The tracks aren't heading toward Leaf's land. They're moving deeper into the forest. You turn to Bjorn. Looks like your ewe took off on her own. His brow furrows. But why would she go into the woods? You shrug. Foxes. Wolves. Maybe she followed another animal. Either way, she didn't go willingly. Leaf exhales sharply. So I'm off the hook? For now, you say. But keep an eye on your flock. And Bjorn, check your fences. Something's letting animals slip through. He grumbles but nods. As the group disperses, you notice an older woman lingering near the edge of the trees. She watches you with a knowing smile, her hands wrapped in a woolen shawl. You handled that well, she says. You raise an eyebrow. Even without the Huldra? She chuckles. Especially without her. People love their stories, but sometimes the truth is simpler. You nod. Most of the time it is. She studies you for a moment, then leans in slightly. Still, I wouldn't go wandering into those woods alone tonight. You glance toward the darkening tree line. Shadows stretch long in the fading light, and for a brief moment, the wind carries a sound that could almost be mistaken for laughter. You offer her a polite smile. Noted. As you walk back toward the village, the sun dips below the horizon, casting the world in soft blue twilight. Another dispute resolved, at least until next time. And somewhere, deep in the forest, alone you wanders farther into the trees, its path disappearing beneath the falling snow. The temple at Hofstare rises from the frozen earth like a relic of another age, its wooden pillars carved with intricate spirals and the watchful faces of gods long worshipped. Smoke curls lazily from its roof, vanishing into the pale winter sky as the wind whispers through the surrounding pines. Here, in this sacred place, tribute takes on a different form, not just grain or livestock, but offerings to the divine, payments wrapped in faith and fear. You step onto the worn path leading toward the entrance, your boots crunching over frost-covered stones. A pair of temple guards flank the doorway, their expressions unreadable beneath fur-lined hoods. They nod in recognition as you pass, though their eyes linger on your satchel, the weight of parchment and tally sticks that carry as much power here as they do in any village hall. Inside, the air is thick with incense and the warmth of burning logs. The flickering glow of oil lamps casts shifting shadows across the walls, where painted scenes of Odin's ravens and Thor's mighty hammer remind all who enter that the gods are always watching. At the far end of the hall, a high priest stands before an altar adorned with silver amulets, carved figurines, and bowls filled with fruits and dried meats, tributes left by those seeking favor, protection, or forgiveness. A woman steps forward to greet you, her dark blue cloak embroidered with golden thread depicting the sun wheel, a symbol of Freyr, god of fertility and prosperity. "Welcome," she says, her voice smooth but measured. "We were expecting you." You offer a polite nod. "I hope preparations have been made." She gestures toward a smaller chamber off to the side, where a table is already set with wax tablets, quills, and small wooden chests stacked neatly against the wall. "Everything is accounted for," she assures you, "though I'm sure you'll want to review it yourself." You smile faintly. "Of course." As you settle into the chair and unfasten your satchel, you recall the first time you came to collect tithes from the temple. It was early in your career, and you'd assumed the process would be straightforward. After all, the Jarl himself paid homage to the gods, and his rule depended on divine blessing. But the priests had other ideas. They claimed that offerings given to the temple belonged solely to the gods, not to mortal rulers. It took weeks of negotiation, a few well-placed references to old sagas, and one particularly dramatic storm that convinced even the most stubborn among them that refusing payment might not sit well with the heavens above. Historians still argue whether Viking-era religious tithes were voluntary or mandatory. Some believe that contributions to temples were seen as acts of devotion rather than enforced taxes, while others suggest that chieftains and kings ensured regular payments under the guise of spiritual obligation. Either way, you know better than to assume anything will go smoothly. The priestess watches as you open your ledger, flipping through pages marked with familiar names: farmers, traders, warriors, all of whom have pledged portions of their harvests, earnings, or spoils to the gods. Some gave willingly, eager for blessings in return. Others needed reminding, a gentle nudge in the form of whispered warnings about divine displeasure should they neglect their duties. You glance at the chests stacked nearby. "How much have we received?" The priestess gestures toward the nearest one. "Grain mostly, some salted fish, a few furs, and a handful of silver coins." She hesitates slightly. There's also something else. You raise an eyebrow. Oh. She opens the lid of a smaller chest, revealing bundles of dried herbs, vials of amber-colored liquid, and what appears to be a bundle of animal bones tied together with red thread. These come from the seer's collection, she explains. Some say they hold special properties. Whether they're meant for trade or ritual, I cannot say. You lean closer, studying the contents carefully. The herbs are familiar enough valued for both medicinal and ceremonial purposes, but the bones unsettle you slightly. You've heard rumors about certain rituals practiced in remote corners of the north, where sacrifices were made not just to honor the gods, but to ensure their continued favor. You close the lid gently. I'll note them in the records, you say, making a quick mark in your ledger. But I'll need to speak with the high priest about their significance. The priestess nods. He'll see you shortly. As you wait, you glance around the chamber, noting the quiet hum of activity beyond the doorway. Temple life moves differently from the outside world. Here, time is dictated by omens, prayers, and the ever-shifting will of the gods. And yet, despite the mysticism, there is structure, order. Even in a place built on faith, debts must be settled, obligations honored. A soft shuffle of footsteps draws your attention back to the entrance. The high priest enters, his presence commanding without needing to raise his voice. His robes are heavier than the priestesses, lined with fur and embroidered with symbols of the cosmos. He carries himself with the weight of authority, though his expression remains unreadable. You bring the Jarl's regards, he says, settling into the seat across from you. You incline your head, and his expectations. A flicker of amusement passes through his eyes. Of course. You clear your throat. The offerings have been gathered as instructed. You say, tapping your ledger. Most appear in order, though I wanted to ask about these. You gesture toward the smaller chest. The priest nods slowly. They are part of the seer's work, he explains, used in rites meant to guide our people. You consider this carefully. And does the Jarl's share extend to such things? For a moment, the priest studies you, weighing his words. Then, with a slow breath, he leans forward slightly. It does, he admits, but tread carefully. These matters are not always understood by those outside the temple. You nod. Understood. A pause stretches between you, filled only by the distant crackle of firewood and the occasional murmur of voices beyond the chamber. Then, the priest speaks again, softer this time. There is more, he says. Something unusual. You raise an eyebrow. Unusual how? He hesitates, then reaches into the folds of his robe, producing a small object wrapped in cloth. He places it on the table between you and unwraps it slowly. It's a pendant simple in design, forged from iron, shaped like a stylized tree. But what catches your eye is the rune etched into its surface, representing the god Odin himself. The seer found this near the grove last night, the priest murmurs. She claims it appeared without warning, as if placed there by unseen hands. You study the pendant carefully, resisting the urge to reach out and touch it. Superstition runs deep in these lands, and objects like this carry weight beyond their material value. Still, you can't ignore the possibility that someone left it deliberately, perhaps as a message, a warning, or even a test. You meet the priest's gaze. "I'll make note of it," you say finally, "but I suggest keeping it hidden for now." He nods solemnly. "Agreed." As you pack away your ledger and prepare to leave, the weight of the day settles on your shoulders. Collecting taxes is never simple, but when gods are involved, every transaction carries an extra layer of meaning. Some debts are owed to men, others to spirits, and sometimes distinguishing between the two is the difference between peace and something far worse. Stepping back into the cold, you pull your cloak tighter around you, glancing once more toward the temple before turning toward the village. Another duty fulfilled. Another mystery left unanswered. And somewhere behind you, the wind carries the scent of smoke and something older, something waiting in the shadows of history. The mead hall of Skalholm hums with warmth and laughter, its heavy wooden beams soaked in the scent of roasted meat, smoke, and honeyed drink. A fire crackles at the center of the long room, casting flickering shadows across the faces of gathered villagers. Farmers, traders, warriors, and even a few wandering skalds who found temporary shelter from the winter winds. The low murmur of conversation rises and falls like the tide, punctuated by the occasional burst of raucous laughter or the clinking of drinking horns against wooden tables. You sit near the hearth, your boots still damp from the day's journey, your fingers wrapped around a tankard of warmed ale. Across from you, Jarl Sigvard leans back in his chair, his beard streaked with gray and his eyes already slightly glassy from the evening's indulgence. He's not the richest man in the region, nor the most powerful, but he holds influence in ways that matter: land, livestock, and a network of alliances stitched together with debts, favors, and the occasional well-placed threat. And tonight, you're here to collect on one of those debts. Sigvard lifts his own horn, taking a slow sip before setting it down with a satisfied sigh. "A good harvest," he says, nodding toward you. "Better than last year." You offer a polite smile. "Glad to hear it." He grins, then gestures toward the table between you. "So, about that payment." There it is. You lean forward slightly, keeping your tone light. "Yes, you mentioned something about settling your tribute in kind." Sigvard chuckles, rubbing his hands together. "Right, I remember now. Some barrels of salted fish, a few bushels of grain, maybe a cow or two." He pauses, then adds with a smirk, "Or was it 3 cows? You raise an eyebrow. "You said 2. He waves a hand dismissively. "Details, details. This is how it always starts. A little humor, a little generosity, a lot of vague recollection. By morning, men like Sigvard will swear they paid more than they actually did, or worse, claim they never made the deal at all. That's the danger of doing business under the influence of mead. Promises made in the glow of candlelight rarely survive the cold clarity of dawn. Historians still argue whether Viking-era contracts were binding when made under intoxication. Some suggest that oral agreements carried weight regardless of sobriety, especially if witnesses were present. Others believe that disputes arising from drunken deals were often settled through arbitration rather than force, with mediators stepping in to determine what was fair. Either way, you know better than to let things slide just because someone forgets their own words after a few drinks. You set your tankard down carefully. "I have it written in my ledger," you say, tapping the worn leather cover resting beside you. 2 cows, 5 bushels of barley, and 3 barrels of salted herring. Sigvard blinks slowly, as if trying to recall the moment. Then, with a sheepish grin, he nods. Right, of course. He glances around the hall, searching for something or someone. Where's Hilda? She should be here for this. A woman seated a few benches away looks up sharply, her expression shifting from mild amusement to wary suspicion. What about me? She asks, moving closer. Sigvard gestures toward you. Tell him what we agreed to. Hilda folds her arms, studying you carefully. We didn't agree to anything, she says flatly. Not officially. You exhale slowly, resisting the urge to pinch the bridge of your nose. This is exactly why you prefer written records over spoken promises. Too many variables, too many opportunities for misinterpretation or outright deception. You were there, Sigvard insists. At the feast. We toasted to it. Hilda rolls her eyes. We toasted to everything that night. A murmur of agreement ripples through the nearby listeners. You glance around, noting the knowing smirks exchanged between some of the older villagers. Yes, this is familiar territory. Drunken negotiations that seem brilliant in the moment, only to become murky the next morning. You clear your throat. Let me ask you both something, you say evenly. Did either of you witness this agreement being made? A few heads shake. One man shrugs. Another mutters, too much mead that night. You nod slowly. Then I suppose the question becomes, who owes what, and under what terms? Sigvard straightens slightly, clearly sensing an opportunity to reframe the conversation. I offered payment, he says. That should count for something. You tilt your head. It does. But until I receive it, it remains a promise, not a transaction. Hilda crosses her arms tighter. And what if we don't pay? You hold her gaze without flinching. Then the Jarl will take notice. Silence stretches between you, broken only by the distant sound of laughter from another part of the hall. Then, finally, Sigvard lets out a breath and leans back in his chair. Fine, he mutters. We'll settle it properly tomorrow. Hilda doesn't look thrilled, but she nods. Fine. You offer them both a small smile. Excellent. As they turn away, you reach for your tankard again, sipping the now lukewarm ale. Around you, the hall returns to its usual rhythm. Songs, stories, the occasional argument over dice games. But beneath the surface, the tension lingers. Tonight, you prevented a dispute from escalating. Tomorrow, you'll ensure the debt is honored before anyone has the chance to forget again. Sometimes, collecting taxes isn't about brute force or threats. Sometimes it's about patience, memory, and knowing exactly when to remind people of their own words. And sometimes it's about making sure no one gets too drunk to keep track of what they've promised. The road to Frostholt is treacherous, winding through dense forests where the trees loom like silent sentinels and the wind whispers secrets only the wolves understand. Snow clings stubbornly to the ground despite the approaching spring, melting in patches that reveal muddy trails slick with thawing ice. Your boots sink into the slush with each step, and your horse's hooves struggle for purchase on the uneven path. The journey should have taken 2 days. It will take 3, thanks to the weather, and thanks to the man who rides ahead of you, his presence a constant shadow at the edge of your thoughts. You're not the only tax collector in these lands. Ragnvald the Red has been trailing you for days now, always just far enough behind to avoid confrontation but close enough to remind you that he's watching. He doesn't ride alone. 2 hired men accompany him, their expressions unreadable beneath fur-lined hoods. They don't speak much, which suits you just fine. You've met Ragnvald before, and you know better than to trust a man who smiles too easily and carries a knife hidden in his boot. Historians still argue whether Viking-era taxation was handled by independent collectors or if it operated under a more structured system overseen by regional chieftains. Some believe that multiple collectors worked the same territories, creating competition and occasional conflict over unpaid debts. Others suggest that collectors were assigned specific regions to prevent disputes. Either way, you know the truth. When 2 men arrive in the same village asking for tribute, someone ends up dead. And you'd rather not be that someone. By the time you reach Frostholt, the sky is darkening, and the first stars blink into existence above the treetops. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, and the scent of roasting meat drifts through the air. A few villagers glance toward you as you dismount, their expressions shifting when they notice Ragnvald and his men arriving moments later. Whispers ripple through the gathered crowd, some slipping away into the shadows while others watch with wary curiosity. A boy runs ahead to alert the village elder, and soon enough, an older man steps forward, his face lined with years of hard winters and harder decisions. "We weren't expecting 2 collectors," he says, glancing between you and Ragnvald. You offer a polite nod. "I wasn't aware I had company." Ragnvald grins, stretching his arms wide as if welcoming an old friend. "Surprise." His voice is smooth, almost cheerful, but there's a sharpness in his eyes that tells you he didn't come here by accident. The elder shifts uncomfortably. "Which one of you speaks for the Jarl?" You exchange a look with Ragnvald, both of you waiting for the other to answer first. Finally, you speak. "I carry the Jarl's seal," you say, tapping the wax imprint hanging from your satchel. "And my records are up to date." Ragnvald scoffs. "So am I." He gestures toward his own satchel, though he makes no move to open it. "And I'm sure we can settle this amicably." The elder clears his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside." The hall is warmer than the night air outside, its hearth crackling with embers that cast long shadows across the wooden walls. You take a seat near the fire, keeping your satchel within easy reach. Ragnvald settles opposite you, his posture relaxed, but his fingers twitch slightly against the table. He's not nervous, he never is, but he's calculating, weighing his options like a gambler deciding how many dice to throw. The elder watches both of you carefully. "Now," he says, folding his hands together, "which one of you has the right to collect?" You glance at Ragnvald. "That depends," you say evenly. "Did the Jarl send you?" His grin widens. "Of course. You wouldn't happen to have a letter from him, would you?" He leans back in his chair, feigning thoughtfulness. "Ah, well, letters get lost sometimes, especially during the winter." You raise an eyebrow. "Convenient." The elder sighs, rubbing his temples. "Look, we've paid our tribute once already this season. We don't have the means to pay twice." Ragnvald waves a hand dismissively. "No need to panic. We'll figure something out." He turns to you, his expression suddenly serious. "You and I both know how this works. There's always room for negotiation." You study him for a moment, then nods slowly. Agreed, but let's make it fair. He tilts his head. Oh, you pull your ledger from your satchel, flipping through the pages until you find the entry for Frostholt. Last year they paid in grain, salted fish, and wool, you say. This year, they owe the same. You tap the page. If you want a share, you'll have to split it with me. Ragnvald considers this, then shrugs. Fine by me. The elder looks relieved. Then it's settled. But you know better. Nothing is ever truly settled when men like Ragnvald are involved. Later that night, as you prepare for bed in the small chamber the villagers have offered you, you hear footsteps outside your door. You don't move, simply listening as the sound lingers for a moment before fading away. You tighten your grip on the knife beneath your pillow. Tomorrow you'll collect what's owed. But tonight you'll keep one eye open for Ragnvald and for whatever game he's playing. The village of Vindheim is quieter than most. Its wooden homes nestled in the shadow of a steep hill where the wind howls like restless spirits. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, and the scent of fresh bread and stew drifts through the crisp morning air. You've been here before, twice last year, once the season before, and each time you've encountered the same stubborn force. Helga, the widow with more willpower than half the warriors in the Jarl's Hall. She stands at the edge of her property now, arms crossed, eyes sharp beneath the hood of her woolen cloak. A basket hangs from one elbow, filled with herbs she's just collected from the garden behind her house. She watches you approach without a word, her expression unreadable. You offer a polite nod. Helga! She doesn't return the greeting. Instead, she tilts her head slightly. Back again. You smile faintly. It's that time of year. She snorts, setting the basket down on a wooden bench beside her door. Of course it is. You step onto the packed dirt path leading toward her home, careful not to overstep. Helga isn't hostile, far from it, but she has a way of making even the most routine transactions feel like a battle of wits. She knows the laws better than most men twice her age, and she never lets you forget it. Historians still argue whether Viking-era inheritance laws favored women or left them vulnerable to exploitation. Some believe that widows retained significant rights, including control over land and livestock, while others suggest they were often pressured into remarriage or forced to rely on male relatives for protection. Either way, Helga is proof that some women managed to carve out their own power in a world built by and for men. You clear your throat. I assume your tribute is ready? She raises an eyebrow. And if it isn't, you keep your tone light. Then I'll have to make a note of it. She gestures toward the fields beyond her house, where two sturdy cows graze peacefully under the pale morning sun. You see those? You glance at them, then back at her. Yes, they're mine, she says simply. Not my late husband's brothers, not my son's.
Mine.
You nod slowly. That's as it should be. She studies you for a moment, then exhales sharply. Good, because I won't be giving them up. You hold her gaze, recognizing the unspoken challenge in her words. This isn't just about payment. It's about ownership, tradition, and the quiet defiance of a woman who refuses to let anyone dictate her fate. You adjust your satchel, pulling out your ledger. Then perhaps we can discuss alternative forms of tribute. Helga folds her arms. Like what? You flip through the pages until you find her entry from last season. Last year, you paid in wool and dried fish. She nods. And this year, you could do the same. She considers this, then shakes her head. Not enough wool yet, and the fishing hasn't been good. You raise an eyebrow. Is that so? She narrows her eyes slightly. Don't play games with me. You chuckle softly. Never. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind. One you've heard whispered among traders and recorded in old scrolls. It seems that some Norse communities allowed women to act as official witnesses in legal matters, particularly when it came to land disputes and inheritance agreements. In rare cases, they even held positions of authority, overseeing contracts and mediating conflicts between rival families. Helga, you suspect, would have thrived in such a role if only society had allowed it. You tap your quill against the parchment. If wool and fish aren't available, perhaps something else? She hesitates, then glances toward the barn. I have some grain stored. You nod. That works. She sighs, clearly reluctant but willing to negotiate. Fine. I'll set aside what I can. You make a quick note in your ledger, then look up. One more thing. Her shoulders stiffen slightly. What now? You keep your voice neutral. Your son. Has he come of age? She frowns. Why? You shrug. Just checking. If he has, he may owe his own tribute soon. She crosses her arms tighter. He's still learning. You nod slowly. Fair enough. But you know the truth. Her son is nearly 16, strong and capable, already helping with the farm and tending to the animals. Soon, he'll be expected to contribute fully to the Jarl's coffers, just like every other able-bodied man. And when that day comes, Helga may find herself fighting another battle, one over what belongs to her and what belongs to the system. For now, though, she offers a tight smile. I'll have your grain by sundown. You close your ledger with a satisfied nod. Appreciated. As you turn to leave, she calls after you, her voice softer this time. You always make it sound so simple. You glance back over your shoulder. Because it usually is. She shakes her head with a small laugh. You say that like you don't enjoy watching people squirm. You offer her a knowing smile. Only when they deserve it. With that, you walk away, the weight of your satchel growing heavier with each new entry. Another debt settled, at least temporarily. Tomorrow, there will be more negotiations, more disputes, more reminders that power doesn't always come from swords and shields. Sometimes, it comes from knowledge, patience, and the quiet strength of a woman who refuses to be overlooked. And somewhere behind you, Helga watches until you disappear around the bend. Her expression unreadable, but her resolve unshaken. The road to Uppsala is long and winding, stretching through dense forests where the wind whispers secrets through the pines and icy rivers carve paths through frozen earth. You ride in silence, your horse's hooves crunching against the hardened trail, the weight of your satchel pressing against your side like a reminder of all you carry. Not just parchment and tally sticks, but the expectations of men who rule from halls lined with gold and blood. Uppsala is not just another village. It is the heart of the Norse world, a place where kings and jarls gather beneath the watchful eyes of gods carved into wood and stone. Here, tribute is not merely collected. It is demanded, honored, and sometimes feared. The temple complex alone spans acres, its towering pillars adorned with the skulls of sacrificed animals. its altars stained with offerings meant to appease the divine. And at its center stands the high temple, where priests speak in riddles and omens shape the fate of entire kingdoms. You've been here before, once as an apprentice, once under less favorable circumstances, but never without purpose. This time you arrive bearing records, debts owed by farmers and traders alike, payments that must be accounted for before the spring thaw turns roads to mud and villages to isolation. But you also come with questions. Historians still argue whether Uppsala functioned as a true political and religious capital, or if it was more of a ceremonial hub where power gathered only during great festivals. Some believe that the high priests wielded authority equal to kings, their influence stretching across lands far beyond the temple walls. Others suggest that Uppsala was simply a meeting ground, a place where alliances were forged and disputes settled over shared feasts and whispered negotiations. Either way, you know one thing for certain: those who control Uppsala control more than just tribute, they control belief itself. As you approach the outskirts of the city, the scent of burning incense thickens in the air, mingling with the smoke of countless hearths. Merchants line the streets, their stalls overflowing with goods from distant lands. Amber beads from the Baltic, silver coins from the east, woven cloaks dyed in colors so rich they seem to glow even in the dim winter light. Children dart between legs, chasing each other past wooden statues of gods whose faces have weathered into something almost human. A man steps into your path, his robes dark blue, embroidered with golden thread depicting the sun wheel. His beard is neatly trimmed, his gaze sharp beneath the hood of his cloak. "You're early," he says, his voice smooth but measured. You dismount, handing your reins to a waiting stable boy. "I wanted to avoid the crowds." He nods slowly. "Wise choice." He gestures toward the temple grounds. "They're expecting you." You follow him through the winding streets, past rows of longhouses and open courtyards where fires burn low beneath iron cauldrons. The deeper you go, the quieter it becomes, until only the soft crunch of your boots against packed snow fills the space between you. At last, you reach the temple's inner sanctum, a vast hall built from polished timber, its beams carved with runes that glow faintly in the flickering torchlight. At the far end, a figure waits beside the altar, his presence commanding without needing to raise his voice. High Priest Sven. He turns as you enter, his expression unreadable beneath the heavy folds of his robe. "Welcome," he says, his voice deep, resonant. "The Jarl sends his regards?" You incline your head. "And his expectations." A flicker of amusement passes through his eyes. "Of course." You clear your throat, stepping forward. "I've brought the records from the outer settlements," you say, unfastening your satchel. "Tribute has been collected, though some debts remain outstanding." Sven watches as you spread the scrolls across the table, his fingers tapping lightly against the wooden surface. "Let me see." You begin going through the entries, detailing what was paid, what remains unpaid, and which villages require further negotiation. As you speak, you notice the way his gaze lingers on certain names. Farmers who gave generously, merchants who withheld more than expected, warriors who owe both coin and favor. When you finish, he exhales slowly. "This will suffice for now." You nod. "Good." But then he leans forward slightly, lowering his voice. "There is something else." You raise an eyebrow. "Oh." His expression shifts, becoming more solemn. The seer has spoken. Ah, of course she has. The temple seer is a woman known only as Ursa, her visions sought by kings and commoners alike. Some claim she speaks with the voices of the gods. Others insist she simply listens well and knows how to weave words into prophecy. Either way, when she speaks, people listen. You fold your arms. And what did she say? Sven hesitates, then murmurs. She says the Jarl's hold weakens. A chill runs through you, though you keep your face neutral. That's concerning. He nods. Indeed. You glance at the scrolls again, suddenly aware of how much more than tribute rests on these records. If the Jarl's power wanes, so too does the stability of the regions under his rule. Debts unpaid, alliances broken, and worse, rival factions rising to fill the void. You clear your throat. Then perhaps we should ensure his coffers remain full. Sven studies you for a moment, then offers a slow smile. Precisely. As you pack away the scrolls, the weight of your journey settles on your shoulders. Collecting taxes is never simple, but here, in the shadow of the gods, every transaction carries an extra layer of meaning. Some debts are owed to men, others to spirits. And sometimes distinguishing between the two is the difference between peace and something far worse. Stepping back into the cold, you pull your cloak tighter around you, glancing once more toward the temple before turning toward the city. Another duty fulfilled, another mystery left unanswered. And somewhere behind you, the wind carries the scent of smoke and something older. Something waiting in the shadows of history. The wind carries secrets across the fjords, whispering through the rigging of moored ships and curling around the wooden posts that mark the edges of hidden coves. You stand at the edge of one such cove tonight, your boots sinking slightly into damp earth as you watch the tide roll in beneath a sky heavy with stars. The sea is quiet, too quiet, and that silence speaks volumes. Smuggling has always been part of life in these lands, with trade routes stretching from the icy north to the distant east. Goods move constantly, carried by merchants, warriors, and opportunists alike. Some trade openly, their wares displayed in bustling markets where coin changes hands and contracts are sealed with clasped arms and shared drinks. Others operate in the shadows, slipping past checkpoints under cover of darkness, their cargo hidden beneath barrels of salted fish or bundles of wool, and it falls to men like you to catch them. You glance toward the small fishing village nestled along the shore behind you. Most of its residents live simple lives, rising before dawn to mend nets, haul traps, and sell their catches in nearby settlements. But some, those who know how to slip between the cracks of law and tradition, use those same boats for something far more lucrative. Silver, spices, even stolen livestock. Anything valuable enough to fetch a high price ends up in their hands sooner or later. Historians still argue whether Viking-era smuggling was widespread or merely an occasional nuisance. Some believe that taxation and tribute collection were strict enough to discourage illegal trade, while others suggest that enforcement varied greatly depending on location and political influence. Either way, you know one thing for certain: people will always find ways to avoid paying what they owe. A flicker of movement draws your attention to the shoreline, where a lone figure moves cautiously between two overturned boats. You recognize him instantly, Eric the fisherman, known for his skill with a net, but even better known for his ability to disappear when questions arise about missing cargo. He's not alone. Another man waits near the tree-line, half hidden in shadow, scanning the road leading down from the village. A lookout, you signal to your companion, a former warrior named Bjorn, now employed as both muscle and investigator, and together you step forward. Your boots make no sound against the wet sand. "Evening, Eric," you call, just loud enough to startle him. He freezes mid-step, then slowly turns toward you, forcing a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you here." You offer a polite nod. "I tend to show up where I'm least expected." Bjorn steps beside you, folding his arms. His presence alone is usually enough to encourage cooperation, though he rarely needs to raise a hand. Tonight, however, the tension in the air suggests things might not go smoothly. Eric glances toward the trees, where his lookout remains frozen in place, uncertain whether to run or stand his ground. "We're just unloading a late catch," he says, gesturing toward a stack of crates resting near the waterline. Nothing suspicious. You walk closer, running a gloved hand over the nearest crate. It smells faintly of brine, but something else lingers beneath. The sharp tang of dried herbs, the unmistakable scent of crushed peppercorns. Not local fare, not cheap either. You look back at Eric. "Where'd this come from?" He hesitates. "Traded for it in Hedeby." You tilt your head slightly. "And how did you get there without passing through any of the Jarl's checkpoints?" Silence stretches between you, broken only by the distant cry of gulls overhead. Finally, Eric exhales sharply. "All right, fine. We picked it up off a merchant ship that ran aground near Skåne." You raise an eyebrow. "Ran aground?" He nods. "Storm damage."
No survivors.
You glance at Bjorn, who simply shrugs. Neither of you believes the story, but calling out a lie outright won't help you learn anything new. Instead, you turn back to the crates, prying one open just enough to glimpse its contents. Bags of spice, wrapped tightly in waxed cloth. Enough to fill several ledgers worth of tribute. You close the lid gently. "This belongs to the Jarl," you say evenly. "Not to you." Eric stiffens slightly. "That's theft." You offer him a thin smile. "No, this is theft." You tap the crate. "What I'm doing is collecting what's already owed." He clenches his jaw but doesn't argue further. Good. That means he understands the stakes. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind. One recorded in old scrolls and whispered among traders who've spent too many nights drinking by the fire. It seems that some Norse communities developed elaborate methods for detecting smugglers, including the use of trained dogs capable of identifying foreign scents and informants embedded within merchant circles. In rare cases, collectors like you relied on secret codes exchanged in rune stones or carved messages hidden in marketplace stalls. The game was always changing, but the rules remained the same. Someone had to keep track of what came and went, and someone had to make sure nothing disappeared without being accounted for. You fold your arms. "Here's what we'll do," you say. "You give me the cargo. I don't report this little side business to the Jarl's men." Eric narrows his eyes. "And if I refuse?" You let the question hang in the air for a moment before answering. "Then I'll be forced to assume you're withholding tribute." His expression darkens slightly, but he knows better than to push too hard. After a long pause, he nods reluctantly. "Fine." As Bjorn begins loading the crates onto a waiting cart, You watch Eric carefully. He doesn't look pleased, but he also doesn't look surprised. Smugglers always think they can stay ahead of the system. They forget that men like you exist. Not warriors, not raiders, but quiet enforcers who keep the balance intact, even in a world built on axes and ambition. By the time the last crate is secured, the tide has shifted, pulling the night deeper into silence. You glance once more at the darkened shoreline, listening for whispers on the wind, for signs of movement beyond the treeline. Tomorrow, you'll return to the village, deliver the seized goods to the Jarl's steward, and file another report in your ever-growing ledger. But tonight, as you ride back toward the hall, the weight of your satchel grows heavier. Not just with parchment and tally sticks, but with the knowledge that peace, like tribute, must be collected, counted, and protected. The seasons turn like the pages of your ledger, each one marked by payments made, debts settled, and promises whispered over warm fires. Spring thaws the frozen rivers, summer brings long days filled with trade and negotiation. Autumn signals harvests to be counted, and winter demands warmth, shelter, and careful planning. You've ridden through them all, from the fjords of the north to the bustling markets of Uppsala, collecting what is owed, ensuring that the Jarl's halls remain stocked, and reminding men that obligations do not disappear just because the wind howls or the snow falls. But time moves differently for those who deal in numbers and records. While warriors grow old from battle wounds and sailors age from salt and storms, you carry the weight of something less visible. The slow realization that your role is not merely about coin, grain, or livestock. It is about order, about stability, about the quiet force that holds a world built on chaos together. You sit now at the edge of a fire pit in the village of Skalholm, the same place where you once mediated a dispute over a missing you and listened to tales of forest spirits. The air is crisp but not yet cold, the scent of roasted meat mingling with the distant hum of children playing near the riverbank. A tankard of warmed ale rests in your hands, though you haven't taken more than a few sips. Tonight, you're not here to collect tribute. Tonight, you're simply watching, listening, remembering. Across from you, an elder named Thormund stokes the fire with a long stick, sending embers spiraling into the night sky. He glances up, his face lined with years of hard winters and harder decisions. "You've been doing this a long time," he says, voice rough but steady. You nod slowly. "Long enough." He chuckles, tapping the end of his stick against a stone. "And yet you're still here." You offer a small smile. "Someone has to be." Thormund considers this, then nods. "Aye, that's true enough." He leans back slightly, gazing into the flames. "Do you ever think about stopping?" The question catches you off guard, not because it's unexpected, but because you've asked yourself the same thing more times than you can count. You've seen men retire early, their bodies broken from years of labor or war. Others cling to their roles until they can no longer walk, their names fading into forgotten corners of history. But you've never had a sword arm to fall back on, no farm to tend when the road becomes too wearying. Your strength has always come from knowledge, from the ability to read people as easily as you read parchment, from knowing when to push and when to let things settle. Still, even the sharpest quill dulls eventually. You glance toward the horizon, where the last light of day clings stubbornly to the sky. "I used to think I'd stop when the Jarl no longer needed me," you admit, But I've learned that rulers always need someone to keep track of what belongs to whom. Thormund grunts softly. Then maybe it's not about needing you, it's about wanting to stay. That gives you pause. Historians still argue whether Viking-era tax collectors were seen as necessary evils or respected figures within their communities. Some believe that collectors wielded quiet power, acting as intermediaries between chieftains and common folk, ensuring fairness in a system often dictated by brute force. Others suggest that collectors were viewed with suspicion, regarded as little more than enforcers of authority who took more than they gave. Either way, you know the truth. You are neither hero nor villain. You are simply someone who understands that balance must be maintained, even if no one thanks you for it. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind. One recorded in old sagas and whispered among traders who've spent too many nights drinking by the fire. It seems that some Norse communities developed elaborate methods for selecting tax collectors, favoring those who could mediate disputes, memorize complex agreements, and maintain neutrality even in the face of personal feuds. In rare cases, collectors were chosen based on lineage, trained from childhood to inherit both the responsibility and the burden of their predecessors. You weren't born into this life, but you've carried it well enough. Thormund watches you carefully, sensing the shift in your thoughts. So what happens next? He asks after a moment. You exhale slowly, staring into the fire. I don't know, you admit. I suppose I'll keep doing what I've always done. Collect, record, remind people of what they owe. You glance at him, offering a faint smile. Unless you've got a better idea. He chuckles again, shaking his head. Nah. Someone's got to keep the rest of us honest. You raise your tankard in silent agreement, though you don't drink. Instead, you let the warmth of the fire seep into your bones. Let the sounds of laughter and conversation wrap around you like an old cloak. For now, there is peace. Not the kind forged in battlefields or sealed with blood oaths, but the quieter kind. The kind that exists when debts are paid, disputes settled, and trust, however fragile, remains intact. Tomorrow you will ride again. Tomorrow you will knock on another door, listen to another excuse, and make another mark in your ledger. But tonight, as the stars blink into existence above you, you allow yourself a moment of stillness, because you understand now more than ever that your work is not just about money or power. It is about legacy, about the unseen threads that hold a world together, woven not with swords or shields, but with words, records, and the quiet certainty that someone must always remember what was promised. And somewhere, deep in the recesses of your mind, you wonder if, centuries from now, someone will read about a man who traveled from village to village, balancing ledgers instead of blades, and whether they will see him not as a footnote in history, but as its quiet architect. The road home is quieter now, not because the world has changed. Winds still howl through the fjords, disputes still simmer in village halls, and debts still pile up like firewood waiting for winter. But because you have changed, the weight of your satchel feels lighter, not because it holds fewer scrolls or tallies sticks, but because you no longer carry the burden of expectation as you once did. You ride slowly, letting the rhythm of hooves against packed earth lull you into a kind of peace you haven't known in years. The path winds through familiar hills, past ruined stones weathered by time and longhouses where smoke curls lazily from chimneys. You recognize some of them, some with fondness, others with mild exasperation. Each one carries a memory. A stubborn farmer who owed grain, a merchant who tried to bribe you with silver rings, a widow who taught you that power doesn't always come from strength, but from knowing when to listen. As you crest the final hill before reaching your destination, you pull your horse to a stop and look out over the valley below. A modest homestead sits nestled between two rolling slopes, its roof patched with fresh timber, its fields neatly tended. Smoke rises from the chimney, curling into the crisp evening air. Chickens scratch at the dirt near the barn, and a goat, your goat, though you never claimed ownership, wanders lazily toward the edge of the fence. This is where it ends, or rather where it begins again. You dismount, patting your horse's neck before leading him toward the stable. The door creaks open as you step inside, the scent of hay and warm animal breath wrapping around you like an old blanket. You unsaddle the beast, murmuring quiet words as you brush down his coat, then toss a handful of oats into the feeding trough. He snorts appreciatively, nudging your arm with his nose before settling into his stall. You take a deep breath, stepping back outside into the fading light. The sun hovers just above the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks, softly, lazily, as if even he knows there's nothing worth worrying about anymore. A door opens behind you. You're late. A voice calls, warm and teasing. You turn to see her standing in the doorway, arms crossed, lips curled into something between amusement and mild annoyance. She wears a simple wool dress, her hair braided loosely over one shoulder. Time has touched her gently, lines around her eyes, strands of gray beginning to weave through the dark brown. But she still carries herself with the same quiet strength that first drew you to her all those years ago. You offer a small smile. I had business to finish. She raises an eyebrow. And now, you glance around the yard, taking it all in, the house, the land, the distant sound of wind rustling through the trees. Now I'm done. She watches you for a moment, then nods slowly. Good. Inside, the hearth burns low, filling the room with a soft glow. A pot simmers on the stove, the scent of stew mingling with the faint tang of dried herbs hanging from wooden beams. Shelves line the walls, filled with jars of preserved vegetables, bundles of woven cloth, and a few scattered ruined stones, remnants of your past life, repurposed into decoration. You set your satchel down carefully beside the table, unfastening the strap but making no move to open it. There's no need. The ledgers inside will remain untouched from this night forward. She hands you a wooden bowl filled with steaming stew, watching as you take the first bite. Tastes like home, you murmur. She smiles. It should. You've been gone long enough. You nod, letting the warmth settle in your chest. Not just from the food, but from the knowledge that this is real, that this is yours. Historians still argue whether Viking-era tax collectors ever truly retired, or if they simply faded into obscurity, their names lost to time. Some believe that men like you were replaced quietly, slipping away while new collectors took their place without ceremony or recognition. Others suggest that collectors often found roles within their communities, serving as advisors, record keepers, or mediators long after their official duties ended. Either way, you know the truth. Endings are rarely dramatic. They arrive softly, like snowfall, unnoticed until the world around you has already changed. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind. One recorded in old sagas and whispered among traders who've spent too many nights drinking by the fire. It seems that some Norse communities developed elaborate methods for honoring those who maintained order without drawing attention to themselves. In rare cases, retired collectors were given small plots of land, tools, and livestock as a sign of gratitude, allowing them to live out their days in quiet comfort. You weren't promised such things, but somehow you found your own version of it. Later that night, as you sit by the fire with a tankard of warmed ale in hand, she settles beside you, resting her head against your shoulder. Outside, the wind whispers through the trees, carrying with it the distant call of an owl. The goat outside lets out a sleepy bleat, then falls silent. You close your eyes, letting the sounds of the night wrap around you like a lullaby. No more roads to travel, no more doors to knock on, no more disputes to mediate, no more debts to chase. Just this, just now. And somewhere, deep in the recesses of your mind, you wonder if, centuries from now, someone will read about a man who traveled from village to village, balancing ledgers instead of blades, and whether they will see him not as a footnote in history, but as its quiet architect. But for now, you let the fire crackle softly in the hearth. Let the warmth seep into your bones, and let yourself drift into sleep with the knowledge that, for the first time in years, you are exactly where you belong. The fire burns lower now, its embers glowing like distant stars fallen to earth. The warmth still lingers in the room, soft and steady, wrapping around you like a memory you can almost touch. Outside, the wind has quieted, leaving only the occasional rustle of leaves and the faint hoot of a night bird drifting through the dark. Inside, the silence is not empty. It is full, rich with the weight of stories lived, of debts settled, of journeys completed. You feel it now more than ever. The peace that comes not from the absence of struggle, but from the knowing that the work was done well, that every ledger balanced, every dispute resolved, every payment collected helped hold together a world that could so easily have unraveled. You were never the loudest presence in the halls of power, never the one praised in songs or carved into stone. But you were there, quietly shaping the rhythm of life, ensuring that the Jarl's halls remained stocked, that villages stayed fed, that order endured in a land built on chaos. And now you are here, where the fire hums low and the air smells of dried herbs and warm wool. Here, where the goat outside will wake you too early tomorrow morning, demanding attention with persistent bleats. Here, where your satchel rests beside the table, untouched, unneeded. Your eyes grow heavier with each breath, the steady crackle of the fire blending with the soft rhythm of your heartbeat. Somewhere nearby, the dog snores lightly by the hearth, curled into a thick pile of furs. The woman beside you shifts slightly, her breathing already deep and even. She has always known how to find peace, how to let the day slip away without resistance. You are learning to do the same. Outside, the moon rises higher, casting silver light over the hills, illuminating the path you once traveled, now left behind. In the distance, a lone wolf howls, long, low, and fading into the night. It is not a sound of warning, not tonight. It is a song of the wild, of nature reclaiming what was always hers. And somehow it feels like a farewell, a gentle one, So close your eyes now just for a moment. Let the weight of the day settle into the floorboards beneath you. Let the warmth of the fire seep into your bones. There will be mornings ahead filled with chores, afternoons spent tending to stubborn crops, evenings wrapped in quiet conversation and shared laughter. There will be new seasons, new memories, new stories waiting to be written, not in ink and parchment, but in the simple, enduring act of living. And as sleep takes you, know this: you did your part. You kept the balance. You held the line between order and ruin, between debt and payment, between past and future. And now, at last, you are home. Sweet dreams.